Hello again, and welcome to the fourth module of the Azure Fundamentals training course. In today's module, we're going to build on the knowledge you will have gained by completing modules 1 and 2. We're also going to build upon the experience that you've gained by completing the lab exercises in module 3. What are we going to do in this session? Well, we're going to start off by re-reviewing our exam preparation strategy. We're going to take a look at some readiness review questions for each of the core sets of objectives in the AZ-900 exam. The purpose around this is not to try and give you any heads up on what you're actually going to see in the exam. The idea around readiness review questions is to assess your current level of knowledge, to see what you need to go back and learn for the exam. We're not going to show you brain dumps here. What we're going to do here is take you through some questions that follow the same format and structure as the exam questions. They're also going to test exactly the same knowledge that you would need to be able to demonstrate in the exams. As I go through each of these questions, I'm going to explain to you the importance of not just understanding why the right answer is the right answer, but also understanding why the wrong answers are the wrong answers. Let's come back to our exam preparation strategy and see how we're progressing. In modules 1 and 2, we took a deep dive look into each of the sets of objectives for the AZ-900 exam. In module 3, we did a few things. We took a look at the exam structure. So if you've completed that module, you'll be familiar with the styles and types of questions you might be asked in the exam. Also in module 3, we undertook 3 labs, and the idea there was to give you some real hands-on experience that brought the theory you learned in modules 1 and 2 to life. Also during module 3, we discussed revision notes. Now, hopefully as you've gone through this course, you will have made your own revision notes. But what I've done is created a Word document, put it on the Microsoft Teams site for this course. What that contains is my key revision notes. So if there were facts I needed to know to be able to answer all the questions, that's what I put down in those revision notes. Go in and have a look at them. If you've made your own revision notes, compare them against the ones I've created, and make sure that you've got the key information down and that you understand the stuff. It's also important to be able to recall these facts. Now, I don't think there's any value in being able to parrot fashion repeat everything you see on a bit of document. The idea here is that you understand the information that's there, so that when you're confronted with the kind of test questions that we're going to go through in this section today, you're going to at least have the information to go back to answer those questions. So, what we're going to do today, let's take a look at some readiness review tests. I also urge you to take a look at the various Microsoft certified practice tests that are available. There's an excellent company called MeasureUp. They provide practice tests for all the Azure exams. Their content is very good, it's technically accurate, and it's a very good representation of the exam. Now, there are other sources of exam readiness review questions out there. A quick Google search will show you there are lots and lots of different vendors out there. Please be careful. A lot of these organizations will just try and sell you a brain dump where they've just copy and pasted something out of somebody else's content and put it up. There's not necessarily any content control in there. And in all likelihood, you're probably looking at what somebody's stolen from a Microsoft exam from maybe 2 or 3 versions ago. Usually that's basically a shortcut to just losing money and failing the exam. So I would wholeheartedly recommend that you use readiness review tests as a mechanism to see how well you know the subject and where you need to structure your revision. Either coming back to the revision notes, coming back to the videos, going back to the labs, and going through things again just to make sure you understand them. Also, as well as you're reviewing your readiness, it can be beneficial to look at the training from a different perspective. On the Microsoft Learn website, there are many hands-on labs that you can go and take. And just rather than listening to my voice over and over again, that will hopefully give you a bit more of a rounded view on things. Finally, once you've done that, once you're able to look at readiness review tests and you're confidently scoring about 80%, in the case of the MeasureUp practice tests, they've deliberately written them to be a little bit harder and a little bit deeper than what you will actually see on the real exam. So if you're scoring 70–80% on the MeasureUp tests, reliably and consistently, that's the time to get ready and sit this exam. In lesson 2, we're going to review some questions for the Understanding Cloud Concepts objective of the exam. The Understanding Cloud Concepts objective for the exam covers 3 main areas. We need to be able to understand the benefits of cloud computing. Now remember, what the question is asking us for in many of these cases is just to be able to describe a particular technology or capability. So, for cloud computing benefits, we need to be aware of what high availability, scalability, elasticity, agility, fault tolerance, DR, the economies of scale of using the cloud, how CapEx differs from operational expenditure, and we also need to have an understanding of the cloud consumption-based model. We need to be able to compare the three different hosting architectures. So we need to be aware of what IaaS, SaaS, and PaaS are, and to be able to differentiate between the three. Most importantly for that is being able to differentiate where responsibility for administration and development work lies. Then also, we need to be aware of the three cloud computing models: public, private, and hybrid. So let's take a look at a couple of questions that are going to test our knowledge on these subjects. This first question is a pretty typical example of the kind of level of questions you're going to find in the Azure Fundamentals exam. Remember, they're testing our understanding of subjects here. Okay, in this scenario, we have an on-premise network that contains several servers. We plan to migrate all the servers to Azure. We need to recommend a solution that will ensure some servers are available if a single Azure data center goes offline for an extended period of time. What solution should we recommend? Is it fault tolerance, elasticity, scalability, or low latency? The answer to this question is fault tolerance. But why is the answer fault tolerance? Well, let's come back and look at the question. What is the question asking us to do? We're planning to migrate servers to Azure. That means we're going to be running stuff in Azure. That's the platform we're moving to. What they want is a platform that's going to ensure some of the servers are available if a single Azure data center goes offline. So we're not having to build out the exact solution here. In the real world, we would use availability zones or maybe Global Traffic Manager or Azure Site Recovery Manager to do that. But each of those technologies is an example of a fault tolerance capability of Azure. Elasticity. They're not asking us to be able to scale this up or scale it down. They're not asking us for the ability to be able to add in extra resources. So it's not about elasticity or scalability. Low latency. Well, the question is blatantly asking us about availability. Yeah, to making sure that we're protecting against the loss of a data center. So whilst low latency might play a factor in which regions we choose to deploy our resources in and which ones we fail over to, the correct answer, or the most correct answer here, is obviously fault tolerance. What are two characteristics of the public cloud? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct solution is worth 1 point. Dedicated hardware, unsecured connections, limited storage, metered pricing, and self-service management. Of course, the correct answer is options D and E. Let's drill into the key parts of this question. First of all, watch out for the fact that it's asking for two characteristics here. That means the exam would be asking you to select multiple options here as being correct. That would probably find that this question would differentiate itself from a normal multiple choice question by the fact that the responses would have a square-shaped tick box rather than just a round-shaped radio box where only one option is possible. Always keep an eye open for the tick boxes in Azure and be able to differentiate between a round radio button and a square-shaped tick box. Okay, so let's take a look at the answers. Why are the right answers right? Well, metered pricing. It means we can pay for what we use and not have to pay for anything else. That's a characteristic of a public cloud. We're not having to pay for any hardware. We're not having to lay out any capital here. So metered pricing, that's a big benefit to us. Self-service management. With Azure, we build everything by going to the Azure portal. If we want to build things en masse, we go through PowerShell. What that means is there's self-service management built into this stuff. We don't have to worry about saying how big the physical servers need to be. We don't have to worry about, how big is this virtual machine going to be? We go to a portal, we choose a virtual machine size and a build image from the marketplace, and it's created for us. That's self-service management. Why is it not the other answers though? How are we able to spot the incorrect answers? Let's suppose I'd come into this question and I'd forgotten about metered pricing or I'd forgotten about self-service management. How could I maybe try and get a correct answer by figuring out which answers are wrong. Okay, dedicated hardware. No, in Azure, you don't get dedicated hardware. Your workloads get put on the hardware that Microsoft decides to put your virtual machines and your resources on. You have some level of control over which availability set it sits in. You have you have total control over which region it's in, but the ultimate choice of which hardware you're running on is Microsoft's. The hardware you run on is not dedicated to you as a customer. There may be other customers' virtual machines running on there. Unsecured connections. Well, that stands out to me as something that's going to be a wrong answer because it's not a benefit. An unsecured connection wouldn't be a benefit. And also as well, Azure doesn't really offer connections that are unsecured because pretty much any way of getting in there, you can put things like encryption on there and authentication on the connections as well. So that's a bit of a red flag there that would be wrong. And then limited storage. The idea here is that we can scale elastically. So if I say need 2 terabytes today, but in 6 months' time I need 4, 8, or 12, I could scale that storage up. That's absolutely one of the characteristics of cloud computing. So limited storage is obviously going to be the wrong answer. So you're starting to see now the importance of 2 things. First of all, if you have a look through the answer there, I've highlighted certain phrases as put in purple because they're really important to how we answer this question. The important thing to take away from this question is the idea of it's asking for 2 answers here, not just one. And you will see when you go to answer the question, rather than being single tick radio buttons, there'll be a multiple select checkbox next to the questions. Square and round buttons. Watch out for that. In lesson 3, we're going to go through some readiness review questions that'll help with the understanding core Azure services objectives. One of the more substantial objectives on the exam is understanding Azure core services. Now again, please do bear in mind that quite often what all the exam is asking us to do is to be able to describe or be aware of what these various components and services are. So, the Azure architectural components we need to be aware of are regions, availability zones, resource groups, Azure Resource Manager, and we also need to be able to articulate the benefits and use cases of using these architectural components in our solutions. We need to be able to describe some of the core products available in Azure that are broken down roughly into the packages of compute, so that would be virtual machines, PaaS applications, scale sets, availability sets, virtual network resources, VNets, subnets, VPNs, ExpressRoute, firewalls, storage accounts, so blob, table, file, message, and file storage. We also need to be able to articulate some of the database offerings as well. So just at a high level, being able to explain the differences between SQL Server on IaaS and SQL Server Platform as a Service in Azure, and some of the other options available for databases like Cosmos DB and Document DB. We need to be able to describe some of the solutions that are available on Azure. So remember from our training, solutions are larger architectures that typically can't handle similar types of business and use cases. So for example, we need to be aware of the solutions available for the Internet of Things, big data and analytics, artificial intelligence, serverless computing, and what we need to be able to do is explain what those solutions are. Now, we don't need to be able to go away and configure them or build them for ourselves, but we need to have a basic understanding of the components that sit in each of those solution areas. So the level of information we need here is really down to what are the building blocks of an IoT solution on Azure. It's important that we understand the benefits and outcomes of using Azure solutions. The whole point of an Azure solution is to radically accelerate the time to market of you creating a solution for Internet of Things or AI. The idea is so much of it is already there and pre-built. A lot of the problems you face when developing your AI solution are the same as the problems other people have developed building theirs. So there's a lot of component reuse in here. And this is one of the big sell points of Azure as a platform. Finally, in this set of objectives, we need to have a solid understanding of the Azure command line interface, the Azure PowerShell console, the Azure portal, and the Azure Advisor console within the portal. Now, for the exam, you're not going to be expected to produce any PowerShell scripts or write any command line interface commands. But what you are going to need to be able to do is to understand when you might use the command line interface instead of using the portal. when you might use Azure PowerShell instead of using, say, the portal or the GUI or some other form of inputting stuff in there. Also, as well as Azure Advisor, we need to be very mindful of what Azure Advisor is. It's not the most complex technology in the world, but it's got some real power to it, and it's one of the great overlooked features of Azure. Azure Advisor is a way of Azure telling you what you should be doing to keep yourself geared up with best practice. So it's quite obvious that Microsoft want to test your knowledge of what is Azure Advisor to make sure that we're telling our customers to enable it, to go and look at the feedback that's in there and act on it. Right, let's take a look at some of the types of questions you might come up against in the exam for the understanding core Azure services objective. You have an Azure environment that contains 10 virtual networks and 100 virtual machines. We need to limit the amount of inbound traffic to all the Azure virtual networks. What should we create? So the answer to this question is an Azure firewall. Why is it an Azure firewall? Okay, the clue's in the question here. If we look at the top, it's telling us that we've got 10 virtual networks. That means there are 10 individual networks here that we need to be able to control the traffic that comes in there. So that's inbound traffic. So what we would do in that circumstance is we would deploy an Azure virtual firewall appliance at the front of our networks and then join each of our virtual networks to that firewall. The Azure firewall effectively becomes our inbound traffic route from the public internet. So why is it not one network security group? Conceivably, what we could do is we could create one network security group and attach it to each of the virtual network cards on those 100 virtual machines. Well, first of all, that's a bit laborsome. The other thing is as well, we need to bear in mind how network security groups work. Network security groups will filter the ports and packets of data that the virtual network card picks up, or the traffic that can flow into a given network security group. However, what it doesn't do is determine what traffic actually flows into the virtual network. A network security group will basically prevent certain ports and protocols being looked at, but only an Azure firewall will do inspection of the packets of data at the perimeter and prevent that traffic from coming into the VNet. The next incorrect action here is 10 virtual network gateways. So the idea there would be that we would create 10 VNet gateways, presumably one on each of those virtual networks. But those virtual network gateways by themselves aren't going to do anything to restrict the amount of traffic that's coming in. All a virtual network gateway does is allow one virtual network to connect to another VNet or to an on-premise location or to an express route circuit. So also as well with number 10 is your express route circuits. All the express route circuit is going to do for us is connect us back to our network. Now, having 10 individual express route circuits is probably overkill anyway. We would most likely share one connection back to our network. So that flags up a red herring there for me. Okay, something else to be wary of as well is that having a network gateway and having an Azure express route circuit will not reduce the amount of traffic coming into the network. There's nothing there that's actually going to prevent traffic coming through. It might restrict the traffic that's coming through, but it's not going to give us any capability by itself to stop traffic coming through. Only an Azure firewall is going to inspect those packets of data and drop the packets that aren't relevant or secure enough for our platform. You plan to map a network drive from several computers that run Windows 10 to Azure storage. You need to create a storage solution in Azure for the planned map drive. What should we create? An Azure SQL database, a virtual machine data disk, a file service in a storage account, or a blob service in a storage account? The answer here is to create a file service in a storage account. Strictly speaking, what we would do in Azure is we would create a storage account, then within that storage account, we would create a files container. Now, if you think back to what we talked about in the storage module, a files container is some hard drive space with an SMB mount point that allows us to map drives from an SMB client. So Windows 10 is an example of an operating system that has an SMB client in it. So we can then use that Windows 10 machine to map a drive to that Azure storage account. So the key things to watch out for in this question were network drive. Yeah, we're looking to map a drive to something here. That should be telling me that file storage is what we need to use here. So let's look at why the other answers are incorrect. So first of all, an Azure SQL database. As we should all know, Azure SQL databases are a storage capability. However, SQL databases store records in database tables. It's not the same thing as file storage at all. A virtual machine data disk. Now this could be very, very tempting, especially if you're an infrastructure engineer that comes from an old school environment where you might create a file share on a virtual machine based on a hard drive and share out some of that capacity. Why is that the wrong answer? So yes, you could create a VM in Azure. Yes, you could create an endpoint for that or a public IP address for that file share and expose it over the public network. And yes, you could mount a drive to that. But we need to look at what this question is specifically asking us. Yeah, it's asking us to connect to Azure storage. It's not asking us to connect to a virtual machine. It's specifically telling us that we're going to use an Azure storage subscription to keep this data in. So that would rule out use of a virtual machine disk, and that would tell us that the most correct answer here is to use a file storage in a storage account. Answer D is incorrect because blob services can't be communicated with over server message block. If I want to communicate, if I want to read, write, delete, move files into or out of blob storage, I need to be using RESTful API commands to do that. Blob storage is there for applications to store data and files in, not to map a drive to. So the reason why blob storage isn't right is because we're not going to be able to create, if we create a blob service container in our storage account, we're not just going to be able to map a drive to it. So this is another example of your exam questions where some things might seem correct. This is another example of that horrible, oh, there's a right answer, then there's the Microsoft right answer. And presumably the people would be telling you that the right answer was to create a virtual machine and put a hard drive on it. That's not true at all. Read through what the question is saying. Don't miss out on the subtle nuances in the question that will lead you towards one solution being correct. Remember, the people that get paid to write these exam questions aren't looking for your real world experience. They're looking for your ability to demonstrate knowledge of a very, very specific set of parameters. In the case of this question, they're wanting you to demonstrate that you know the difference between the capabilities of file and blob storage, that you know what a SQL database is, and that you understand that virtual machine data disks aren't really part of an Azure storage subscription as such. They're not an Azure storage service. Your company plans to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. What should the company use to build, test, and deploy predictive analysis solutions? Is it Azure Logic Apps, Azure Machine Learning Studio, Azure Batch, or Azure Cosmos DB? Now this is an incredibly broad question at first glance. It's just telling us that we're planning to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. Right? Let's look at the subtle nuances in this question. We know we're building an AI solution, yeah, but what the question is specifically asking us is, what should the company use to build, test, and deploy predictive analysis solutions? So, whilst we might use Azure Logic Apps as part of an AI solution, whilst we might use Azure Batch as a component in an AI solution to handle processing large amounts of data, whilst we might use Cosmos DB to store results of that data, the tool we need to be able to do to build, test, and deploy predictive analysis solutions is the entire machine learning studio. It's possible A, B, and C could handle part of that solution for us. We could build something out of that. But we have the Azure Machine Learning Studio, which is a bigger set of capabilities that allows us to build, test, and deploy predictive and analytics solutions. Watch out for questions like this. Again, there's a chance there that some one of these answers could seem like the real world answer, and that the one answer Microsoft looking for is the Microsoft answer. That's not the case at all here. Microsoft have actually, if we look at the nuance of this question, it's telling us what we use to build, test, and deploy predictive analysis solutions. That's the job of Machine Learning Studio. These other components absolutely could be part of an artificial intelligence pipeline or an artificial intelligence solution, but specifically to hit the need that the company is asking for here, we need Machine Learning Studio. Your company has several business units. Each business unit requires 20 different Azure resources for daily operation. All the business units require the same type of Azure resources. You need to recommend a solution to automate creation of the Azure resources. What should you include in your recommendations? Azure Resource Manager templates, virtual machine scale sets, the Azure API management service, and management groups. The correct answer is to deploy the solution using an ARM template. What the solution is insinuating that we would do would be we would create an ARM template that specifies the different resources that each business unit needs. We'll create a generic template for the configuration of those resources. That way, each time a business unit comes along and requires one of those resources, we just run the ARM template and that'll provision everything we need for us. The idea is, because we've got to build out 20 different types of Azure resources daily, there's a lot of work involved in that. If we create a template for that, yeah, because it's the same type of resources, we can reuse that over and over again. Okay, let's take a look at the other answers and drill into why the other answers are wrong. Okay, virtual machine scale sets. VM scale sets are a single virtual machine image that can scale out to multiple copies to cope with elasticity in infrastructure as a service workloads. Whilst you could potentially be tricked into thinking that because we require 20 different Azure resources, a scale set might help with that because it'll deploy more virtual machines, that doesn't help us with this requirement. All the saying that the business unit requires is 20 different Azure resources. So whilst virtual machines may play a part in that, there are also going to be other things like virtual network cards, virtual networks, storage accounts, SQL PaaS instances, app services that could be in there. Quite simply, deploying a virtual machine scale set isn't going to give us a solution towards that that'll help with that. Scale sets, funnily enough, are about scale, not about repeated deployments for different use cases. The Azure API management service, that could sound interesting, couldn't it? We could send some commands, we could send in a script to the Azure API using ARM, and that would build out the solutions for us. Yes, that would, but that's not what this answer is telling us. The answer here for C is suggesting that we could use the Azure API management service to do this. Whilst Azure Resource Manager has application programming interfaces exposed that allow us to create resources through PowerShell scripts and by sending templates into Azure, that's not what this answer is giving us. They're telling us about the Azure API management service. The Azure API management service is different to the ARM Resource Manager API objects. The two are different things. The Azure API management service is about us providing controls around application programming interfaces that are developed for other applications. The Azure API management service is an offering that's used to provide security around API applications that we create. It's not the same thing as the Azure Resource Manager APIs, which is the set of APIs that listen to commands we send in to make Azure build things. So the two are just fundamentally different things there. And then D, management groups. Management groups aren't going to help us here. Management groups would allow us to divide up our Azure environment and delegate and assign policies to different parts of our Azure tenant. So we can divide up who can create resources where and give us a more granular control over resources and who can control them. And creating an Azure management group here isn't going to help us with the automated tasks of deploying 20 plus resources each day for the business units. Which Azure service should you use to correlate events from multiple resources into a centralized repository? Azure Event Hubs, Azure Analysis Services, Azure Monitor, or Azure Log Analytics? This is another example of a question that can actually seem quite vague. And we just see that, look, oh, it's about events. Azure Monitor will sort that out for us. That isn't true. Look at the question. Read what the question is asking specifically. Here, this question is asking us, Which Azure service should we use to correlate events from multiple resources into a centralized repository? Azure Event Hubs, that's the service that we would use to take events from different services and bring them together. That will basically pull in those events into one place that we can then bring them someplace else. That is our correlation engine for events. Why is it not Azure Analysis Services? Well, the question isn't asking us about what we should do to analyze services, look for trends, look for historical patterns in our data. It's not asking us to provide analysis of this information at all. Although presumably once we've got this information into a centralized repository, we might want to do some kind of trend or pattern analysis in it. That's not what the question is asking us for. Okay, if I kind of blink my way through this, I might have picked the answer C for Azure Monitor, yeah, because Azure Monitor is basically a place where we can report upon log information and event information. So it seems like it could be a good candidate for an answer. That's not true. Again, what I come back to is specifically what is the question asking us to do? The question is asking us to correlate events, not analyze them, not store them, yeah? Azure Monitor, and specifically speaking, the Azure Log Analytics workspace would be our centralized repository of that information. However, Azure Event Hubs is the correlation engine that we would use to bring those events together. Azure Monitor and the Log Analytics component of there would just be the place where we stored that. They would be the centralized repository. The question is asking us for what should we use to correlate the events from multiple resources, not where to store them. So again, read the question carefully. If you're coming back and looking at the answers and two or more of them seem correct, okay, it could be that one answer is more correct than another, and what determines that is the specifics of what's being asked for in the question. Drag and drop questions like this one can break the monotony a little bit of just answering true, false, yes, no, A, B, C, or D. What we're doing here is we're having to answer 3 questions on 1 page. So don't lose heart here. Don't worry. If you're looking at this question and you don't know all the answers, it doesn't mean to say that you're not going to get points. Even if you just get 1 question right on this page, you'll still get some points. And these questions like this are generally taught with work out, so the total number of points is equivalent of answering 3 separate questions anyway. Don't get fazed by this. Don't get disheartened. Right, let's take a look at what this question's asking us to do. On the left-hand side of the table, there are descriptions. On the right-hand side of the table, there's a space where we can drag an answer to. What the question wants us to do is say, based on description, which Azure product best meets that description. So, what it's asking us to do is identify a data science solution that enables computers to predict outcomes and trends without being explicitly programmed. And to do that, we need to look at the offerings on the right-hand side and see which one best suits that need. It's also asking us to identify a solution for building highly reliable and secure serverless applications supporting multiple programming languages. And then finally, it's asking us for an open source enterprise level analytics service that provides for fast and cost-effective processing of massive amounts of data. So, how should we answer this question? Well, the first one, we're looking for a data science solution that enables computers to predict outcomes and trends without being explicitly programmed. Azure Machine Learning is a service that will look at trends, it will look at sets of data, and it will learn from there by itself how to make decisions on that type of data. Therefore, it doesn't need to be explicitly programmed to actually handle that. So machine learning is the answer there. A solution for building highly reliable and secure serverless applications supporting multiple programming languages. So for me, the call-out phrases there were serverless apps and supporting multiple programming languages. So Azure Functions allow us to write code in Python, C#, or Java, or a range of other programming languages as well. When we take an Azure function, what we basically do is take that code and it runs in its own little environment. It almost feels like it's independent of a server. So Azure Functions is the most correct answer for that. The other answer that you might be tempted to think of there might be an Azure Logic app. That's not the right answer here because a Logic app follows a step-by-step process, or a workflow. Yeah, functions get written using programming languages. Azure Logic apps are written using a graphical designer. Finally, an open source enterprise level analytics service that provides fast and cost-effective processing of massive amounts of data. So the call out points in that question for me were open source. HD Insight isn't a Microsoft proprietary technology. Azure just happens to have offerings that implement HD Insight for us. It is an open source offering. Also as well, HD Insight is designed for processing massive amounts of data in a very fast way. So the other things to watch out for, some of the answers that weren't right. IoT Central. Well, there was nothing really about those descriptions that demanded the use of Internet of Things. So that was a bit of a telltale as to why that wasn't used. Logic apps, there was nowhere in here where it was asking us to be able to write software without having to write code or to integrate with other applications specifically. In Lesson 4, we're going to go through some readiness review questions that will help us prepare for the understand security, privacy, compliance, and trust objective questions in the exam. The understanding security, privacy, compliance, and trust objective of the exam is quite substantial. There are several areas that we need to be able to demonstrate knowledge of to be able to pass the exam. However, it's very important to remember that what we need to be able to do is to describe these features. The AZ-900 exam is not testing us on any great technical depth here. It's really testing our awareness of these capabilities and their use cases. So, to be able to pass the exam, we need to be able to be ready to answer questions on the following concepts. So, understanding how we secure the network with things like firewalls, distributed denial of service protection, network security groups. What the exam is going to do is test your ability to choose which one of those network security controls is the appropriate choice for a particular solution. We need to be able to describe core identity services within Azure. So that means we've got to have an awareness of differentiating between authenticating a user and authorizing a user. We also need to be aware of what Azure Active Directory is and the role multi-factor authentication plays in securing authentication. There are several security tools and features of Azure that are really important to us. Now at the fundamentals level, we need to have an understanding of what these tools are and what they give us. So we need to be able to describe Azure security capabilities. We need to be able to talk about the Azure Security Center and the use case scenarios it provides. Key Vault, the questions come up on Key Vault quite increasingly, but again, it's not going to test us too deep on Key Vaults. It's just going to want to know what would we use a Key Vault for and when would we use a Key Vault in our solutions. We need to have an awareness of Azure information protection and how it protects documents and emails even once they've left our infrastructure, and also to be able to describe the capabilities of the Azure Advanced Threat Protection capability. Azure governance is something that comes up quite a lot. Azure policies and initiatives are kind of the new kid on the block at the moment. So I noticed a huge spike in the number of questions that came through testing my knowledge of Azure policies and initiatives when I sat my upgrade exams. Role-based access controls, how we use roles in RBAC to lock down access to resources. How we use Azure resource locks to protect us against accidental deletion and accidental administrative changes. And then also the Azure Advisor Security Assistant section. So when we go into Azure Advisor, there will be security recommendations in there. What the exam is looking for is that we're aware of that tool and that we're basically telling our customers to go in there and check that out and follow that good practice. We need to be able to demonstrate an understanding of how monitoring works. So we need to be able to articulate what Azure Monitor is and how it works. Also as well, there's a lot of value in being able to differentiate between Azure Monitor, monitoring our workloads, our virtual fabric, and the stuff we're responsible for, and Azure Service Health, which gives us an aggregated view of how well Microsoft are performing in their ability to keep the fabric and the physical fabric and data centers and network connections available that we build our virtual resources on. What happens in the real world is the service level agreements that we promise are built on promises Microsoft make. So the Azure Service Health Portal is our way of checking up and seeing how Microsoft are doing. Privacy, compliance, and data protection is hugely important. Microsoft wants to make sure that all the people that work with Azure are able to communicate to stakeholders and tell them about all the great work Microsoft has done in underpinning workloads hosting on Azure becoming compliant with GDPR, ISO standards, NSIT recommendations. They want us to be able to articulate the Microsoft privacy statement, which is all about the promises and commitments Microsoft's making in how they handle our data and our customers' data. We need to be aware of some websites as well. So we've got the Azure Trust Center, which will help us look at how they build and operate Azure and some of their other services. We've got the Azure Service Trust Portal, where we can go in and run things like the Azure Compliance Manager tool that will help analyze our workloads and tell us how compliant they are with a given regulated conditions. Also as well, we can use the Service Trust Center to identify if Azure is compliant for a particular business need, specifically on certain types of data or business use cases. We also need to be aware for the exam about the Azure government facilities in the US and the Azure Germany facilities. These are Azure regions that are slightly different in their capabilities and separation of duties and the way that they're operated. Most importantly as well, with the US government regions, there are some restrictions about who can put workloads in there. Now, there is a slight price difference for those regions, and that's because we're providing a much higher level of isolation and control in there. So it comes as no surprise that during the exam, we'll need to be able to articulate what's special about the Azure US government region and what's special about Azure in Germany. Right, let's take a look at a couple of questions that give us an idea of the kind of knowledge we need to be demonstrating in the exam. Which two types of customers are eligible to use Azure Government to develop a cloud solution? Note, each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Canadian government contractors. B. European government contractors. C. United States government entity. D. United States government contractor. E. European government entity. So before we discuss the answers, let's dive into the really important points from that question. You need to develop an almost like radar-like sense for these sort of things. Okay, first thing, the question is blatantly asking us, which two types of customers? Two types. That means in the exam, this won't be radio buttons, these will be checkboxes. The question is asking us to provide more than one response here. Okay, who's eligible to use Azure Government? So we have to remember at the time of writing, Azure Government is only available in the United States. It's only there for the United States government. So when we say which types of customers can use that, it's going to be United States government entities, part of the United States government, a United States government directorate or agency or department. Also as well, it makes sense that US government's contractors can build those solutions in there so they can be accredited by the same level of standards that the US government maintains that their workloads run on. So it's entirely possible that one of these government contractors will be working under a specific contract signed by a US government agency, that gives them government contractor status. That means they can deploy in there. Okay, the key point here is at the moment, it's the US government that the US government solutions are there for. A Canadian government contractor does not get to come in and create stuff in there. A European government contractor doesn't get to come and create stuff in Azure Government. Neither does a European government entity, because they're not US government or not a US government contractor. They can't create resources in an Azure Government region. Your company wants to ensure that it meets its internal compliance goals and that Azure resources are compliant with company standards. This will include ongoing evaluation for compliance, identification of non-compliant resources as well. We need to recommend a solution. What should we choose? The options are Azure Policies, Azure Advisor, Azure Monitor, or role-based access controls in the Azure portal. The correct answer here is Azure Policies. That's because when we look at the question, the company is talking about remaining compliant with its own standards. It also talks about evaluation, compliance, and identifying non-compliant resources. That's exactly what Azure Policies and what Azure Policy Initiatives do for us. So, what were the other options and why were they wrong? Azure Advisor. It's true, Azure Advisor does look at our Azure resources and look at how they're configured and give us recommendations on them. However, the guidance Azure Advisor gives us is not proprietary to our organization. Azure Advisor's guidance is generic. It's not even industry specific, it's kind of infrastructure specific. So Azure Advisor isn't going to give us any insights on how compliant our resources are with our internal standards and our internal compliance goals. Azure Monitor, well, nobody's asked to know if anything's up or down or is performing slow or performing fast. It's not mentioned anything about notifications here. So Azure Monitor is obviously our monitoring solution. That doesn't help us with these requirements. Then finally, why is role-based access controls wrong? Well, put simply, that role-based access controls would allow us to control who can create and delete and modify resources in Azure. They won't, role-based access controls alone won't do anything to enforce standards on those resources. They will only whitelist or blacklist the users that can create or modify or read those resources. It's entirely possible that when we create an Azure policy, we might use that to enforce role-based access controls or to ensure that Azure Monitor is monitoring a particular service and the particular rules attached to it, and that Azure Advisor is turned on. But yeah, it's the actual Azure policies and initiatives engine that we would use to implement the governance and monitoring around that. Here we have an example of a hotspot question, which means we indicate a correct answer by clicking at a particular point in the screen. Okay, what is this question asking us? Which statements accurately describe Azure Distributed Denial of Service Protection? Statement 1. Azure DDoS is set up automatically when you install the threat protection. 2. Azure DDoS standards provide protection against volumetric, protocol, and application layer attacks. Statement 3. Virtual networks from multiple subscriptions in your organization can link to the same Azure DDoS protection plan. What we need to do now is use the mouse to click on the correct answer for each statement when indicating whether it's true or false. So the correct answers are, right, Azure DDoS is not set up automatically when we install Microsoft Threat Protection. It's actually installed automatically when you create a virtual network. So that first statement isn't correct. The second statement, DDoS standard protection provides protection against volumetric, protocol, and application layer attacks. Yes, that's exactly what standard Azure DDoS protection does. The third statement, multiple networks from multiple subscriptions can all link to the same Azure DDoS protection plan. That's absolutely true, as long as those VNets are in our same subscription. The DDoS protection plan is essentially a set of configurations that can be attached to any of our virtual networks, provided they're in the same subscription. So that answer is true. Quite often you can look at these questions and feel a little bit nervous about them, because the temptation to think is if you don't get all three answers correct, you're not going to get any points. That's not true at all. If I get just one of these statements correct, I'll get a third of the points available for this question. If I get two correct, I'll get 2/3. And if I get all three correct, I'll get all the points available. But these kind of hotspot area questions are usually worth about 3 times what an individual multiple choice question is worth. Remember, in the exam, some questions are weighted with a higher number of score associated with them than others. In Lesson 5, we're going to hit some readiness review questions that will help us with the Understanding Azure Pricing and Support exam objectives. In the Understanding Azure Pricing and Support set of objectives, there are 5 areas that we need to be able to demonstrate knowledge around. Now remember, I have to stress this is a fundamentals exam. We're demonstrating our awareness and familiarity with concepts here. We're not going to be required to go in there and build one of these things in Azure. We just need to be able to explain what it is and how it differentiates between other options that are available. So we need to be able to articulate a good understanding of Azure subscriptions. How does an Azure differ from a tenant? What is an Azure subscription? What options are available to purchase an Azure subscription? Planning and managing the costs that happen in our Azure subscriptions as well. Also really important. We need to be able to understand the purchasing options for Azure for buying Azure services and products. So for example, we need to be able to articulate what Azure free accounts are, the difference between a cloud service provider and an enterprise agreement. We need to be able to understand that certain selections we make in our architectures, like which regions we deploy in, the amount of ingress and egress traffic our solutions generate, what resource types and sizes, all have an impact on the bills we pay. We need to be able to demonstrate the impact of the regional zones for billing purposes, how prices may differ from region to region. We need to be able to articulate what the pricing calculator portal is, and also the total cost of ownership calculator as well. And it's important to be able to differentiate for the exam the difference between the pricing calculator and the TCO calculator. Also as well, we need to be able to articulate some of the best practices for minimizing costs in Azure. So that'll include things like being able to use reserved instances, resizing workloads, automatically shut down workloads when they're not needed as well, and also following the guidance in Azure Advisor. Azure Cost Management, again, the Azure Cost Management feature is something that's still relatively new, so you can probably expect it to be a fair few questions that test your knowledge about the Azure Cost Management tool. We need to be able to understand the support options available within Azure as well. So what support plans are available and what they give and how they differentiate. It's important to be able to articulate how to open a support ticket in the Azure portal. If you haven't had a chance to do so already, go into your own portal and actually create one. Create a support ticket in there. You'll be able to say hello to the good people at Microsoft. Also as well, we need to be able to articulate the different support channels outside of Microsoft. So for example, if we're working with a cloud service provider, which we here at DXC are, there are different support channels. So for example, DXC people will get involved in answering support questions before they go to Microsoft. The Azure Knowledge Center stores information about the specifics of services that run on Azure. So for example, that's where you'll find information on service level agreements. So we need to be able to articulate what a service level availability agreement is, a service level for responses are. Also as well, there are a few products and services that we need to be able to understand how we get a particular level of SLA. So particularly, it's usually compute and virtual machine resources we need to be able to demonstrate there. Finally, the Azure Services Lifecycle. So what we need this deals with is Microsoft developing and releasing new offerings into Azure. There is a lifecycle they go through, as with any bit of software or technology. And what that lifecycle looks like is developing features in private. Then when they're ready to work with a very select set of customers, they'll put that into private preview, and eventually offerings will be put into public preview. Now, there are a couple of nuances about how you access features that are in preview. So we'll need to be able to articulate in the exam how we turn off preview features so that we can't deploy something that's not necessarily fully production, because maybe our regulators won't like that. Also as well, we need to be able to differentiate between what is public preview and private preview. Also as well, we need to understand the term general availability, which means something's out there and ready for use. And then finally, we need to be able to understand where to go in Azure to be able to understand where new features are and what upgrades are coming out for them in the near future. So, with that objective in mind, let's take a look at a couple of questions that'll help us try and get a feel for what we're going to be up against in the exam. Your company has an Azure Professional Direct or ProDirect service plan. A user with the support request contributor built-in role initiates a support ticket through the Azure portal. The support ticket has a minimal business impact of severity C. What's the maximum response time for the initial response to the support ticket? Is it 2 hours, 4 hours, 1 hour, or 8 hours? So when we're looking at questions about support cases, the important contributing factors are what type of service plan does the customer have and what severity they've registered that case with. One of the things you'll see as you go up through the support plans, the response times can change a little bit, but roughly they follow the same kind of patterns. The important thing to remember for the exam is if we're just using the free or the built-in support plans, we don't get a service level response for Microsoft's response time. They just respond on a best endeavors basis. However, because we've purchased a Pro Direct service plan here, we actually get an SLA, which means Microsoft must provide an initial response, which is literally somebody on the phone or email back to us saying, thank you about this, we're assigning an engineer. Severity C on Pro Direct services, they've got 4 hours to do that. There's a lot of information available about support plans, so what I've tried to do is concisely break it down to the minimum amount of information you need. The best place to go and see about this are on these two URLs here. The top URL will take you to an overview page that compares the various support offerings, and then against each one you can drill into the different areas. So for example, ProDirect is documented in the URL below. So don't feel you need to go into too much depth around this stuff. These kind of tests are designed to measure your level of knowledge and drive you towards revision. Now in the exam, you might see a question about service level agreements, you might not, but it's important to have an awareness of this stuff for the exam. Here's another example of a drag and drop question or a hotspot area question that we might find in the exam. So this question is asking us to match each statement about cloud services with the term that describes that capability best. So what it's asking us to do is identify which term describes the ability of a system to remain operational after a critical failure through configurations and other measures such as redundant hardware. Next, it's asking us the ability to increase workload resource support without performance loss through resources being provided to meet peak demands. Then finally, the third statement we're asked to match is the ability to quickly return to an operational state after failure or loss through the use of data backups and or other means. So what we need to do here is match up availability, DR, fault tolerance, HA, or scalability to the relevant statement. The ability of a system to remain operational after a critical failure, that's fault tolerance. Think about RAID arrays in computers. If we lose an individual disk in a RAID array, the server continues to run. That's fault tolerance. The whole idea is that we've designed individual components to be able to survive so that an individual component can fail, but the overall solution continues to work. That's fault tolerance. The ability to increase workload resources to support the performance needs at peak times, that's absolutely scalability, isn't it? That's the ability to scale up by adding more hardware resources or scale out by adding extra instances behind the load balancer. The ability to quickly return to an operational state after a failure or loss through the use of data backups. That's disaster recovery, isn't it? That's not about tolerance. That's not about high availability. It's saying when it's gone bang, when it's gone offline, we need to get things back as quickly as possible. That's what disaster recovery is all about. Let's quickly talk about those two terms that we didn't have a statement for in the question. So agility, that's the ability to be able to provision resources, deploy things, and to make configuration changes quickly in line with business needs. High availability, that's the planning of an environment to implement enough fault tolerance, enough capacity, and enough countermeasures to protect us from service outages. So while it's different from fault tolerance, High availability is about planning our environment to be able to run for a long period of time without disruption. Fault tolerance is about the availability of individual components to be duplicated to prevent a single point of failure. In this sixth and final module of the course, we're going to take a look at readiness review questions. We've covered a few questions already in this course, but it's important to be able to go out and get some more rounded readiness review questions. There are many sources you can choose from. However, the one that I can't help recommending the most is MeasureUp, mostly because they're certified and endorsed by Microsoft. Exam success is all about preparation. What matters in a lot of cases is not the fact that you have the bit of paper with the exam, it's that you've been through the experience of preparing to sit that exam. In preparing for the exam, you obviously need to gain knowledge. That's what we've done in modules 1 and 2. In module 3, we took that knowledge and applied it to some real-world scenarios with some lab exercises. Also in module 3, we took a look at the types and styles of questions that come up in the exam, so you're aware of what to face in the exams. Now, the final part of preparation now is to make sure that the knowledge and experience you have meets the standard required to become certified. So, how do we do that? Readiness review questions. There's a very great big difference between readiness review questions and something else called brain dumps. Let me try and break it down for you. A readiness review question will assess your knowledge of the exam subjects. They'll test your knowledge of all the objectives and make sure you know it to the right level of depth to be ready to sit the exam. It'll do that by giving you a testing experience that looks and feels a lot like the real exam. What you won't see in a readiness review question is the actual questions and answers you would find in the real exam. So, what are brain dumps? Brain dumps are bad in a lot of ways. Brain dumps undermine the integrity of the certification, and they can also undermine your own integrity as well. If you go online and you do a Google search on AZ-900 brain dump, you'll probably find somewhere in the region of about 3,000 to 4,000 hits that come back from different companies and individuals who will want to charge you anywhere from $5 to $150 for a brain dump. Now, brain dumps come in two formats. They're either a PDF document or they're an XML file that gets opened up in a reader application, which gives you like a simulated exam experience. What happens with brain dumps is people have gone into the Microsoft exam and they've either taken some kind of recording equipment with them or they've written down the questions that have been asked and the answers. Now that's obviously a breach of copyright and it's also a breach of integrity as well. What's happened there is people are leaking the content of the actual exams out and selling you that content to try and make money from you. I've seen a lot of people who come to me and say, what do you think of this brain dump? And I've looked at it and the answers that the brain dump provider are giving to the question, they've absolutely got the exact questions that are being asked in the exams, certainly 2 or 3 months ago. But the answers they're providing in those brain dumps are usually very, very wrong, although they've got kind of the right answer. Let's face it, the people producing those brain dumps, they probably prepared for doing that exam by sitting somebody else's brain dump as well, and they maybe plagiarized that. So the risk is with brain dumps, you're looking at other people's wrong answers. The other thing is as well, if you go out passing exams just by sitting brain dumps and memorizing the answer to this question is that, the answer to that question is this, that doesn't make you a good systems engineer. It doesn't make you a good software developer. It doesn't matter what qualifications you have when you get put on a project or you have to deal with a support request and you can't handle it, the certification isn't going to help you very much in that case. So, how do you go about finding good quality, reliable practice tests or readiness review tests? Microsoft have actually made that fairly easy for us. Yeah. Microsoft have a certification program for vendors of practice tests. Pretty much entirely now, the Microsoft only certified provider for practice tests is a company called MeasureUp. What MeasureUp do is quite good. They produce another version of the exam with different questions. Although they follow the same styles and formats of questions and test the same knowledge, they're merely similar to the ones you will have in the exam. The idea being, if you can pass the test in a MeasureUp, you should be fine to pass the actual exam. The most important thing though that measure up tests give you is what's called study mode. That's why if you go through a test, it'll help you identify the areas where you're strong enough to sit and pass the exam today. It'll help you focus on the areas where you need to do more work. And the practice test will also guide you to the online documentation on Azure Docs to tell you and where to go and learn the additional facts that you need to get ready to pass this exam. In closing, there's a world of difference between brain dumps, which are very bad, and measure up tests or official practice tests, which get you ready to sit and pass the exam. And that brings us to the end of this module and this course. What's the next action? Well, get the exam readiness review questions, go back, revisit the labs, look at your training results, get out there and sit that exam. One last pearl of wisdom from me is that nobody ever truly feels prepared for these exams, and you'd be surprised just how much information you'll have gained from doing this course and doing the labs. If you're taking a look at the measure up questions and you're scoring okay at them, have a bash at the exam. You can buy the exam with a repeat option in, so if you fail the first time, you can resit it at no extra cost. You can procrastinate all you like, but the only time you will ever become certified is by biting the bullet, getting in there, sitting that exam and passing it. So I'm going to wish you all the very best of luck.